Chapter 6, Part 1 of Ignatius Donnelly's Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. Chapter 6 is the testimony of the Flora and Fauna. Proofs are abundant that there must have been at one time uninterrupted land communication between Europe and America. In the words of a writer upon this subject, when the animals and plants of the Old and New World are compared, one cannot but be struck with their identity, or nearly all belonging to the same genera, while many, even of the species, are common to both continents. This is most important in its bearing on our theory, as indicating they radiated from a common centre after the glacial period. The hairy mammoth, the woolly-haired rhinoceros, the Irish elk, the musk ox, the reindeer, the glutton, the lemming, etc., more or less accompanied this flora, and their remains are always found in the post-glacial deposits of Europe, as low down as the south of France. In the New World, beds of the same age contain similar remains, indicating that they came from a common centre and were spread out over both continents alike. That quote came from the Westminster Review of January 1872, page 19. Recent discoveries in the fossil beds of the Badlands of Nebraska prove that the horse originated in America. Professor Marsh of Yale College has identified the several preceding forms from which it was developed, rising in course of ages from a creature not larger than a fox until, by successive steps, it developed into the true horse. How did the wild horse pass from America to Europe and Asia if there was not continuous land communication between the two continents? He seems to have existed in Europe in a wild state prior to his domestication by man. The fossil remains of the camel are found in India, Africa, South America, and in Kansas. The existing alpacas and llamas of South America are but varieties of the camel family. The cave bear, whose remains are found associated with the bones of the mammoth and the bones and works of man in the caves of Europe, was identical with the grizzly bear of our Rocky Mountains. The musk ox, whose relics are found in the same deposits, now roams the wilds of Arctic America. The glutton of northern Europe in the Stone Age is identical with the wolverine of the United States. According to Rittermeyer, the ancient bison, Bos priscus, of Europe was identical with the existing American buffalo. Every stage between the ancient cave bison and the European aurochs can be traced. The Norway elk, now nearly extinct, is identical with the American moose. The Cervus americanus, found in Kentucky, was as large as the Irish elk, which it greatly resembled. The Lagomius, or tailless hare, of the European caves is now found in the colder regions of North America. The reindeer, which once occupied Europe as far down as France, was the same as the reindeer of America. Remains of the cave lion of Europe, Felix spelai, a larger beast than the largest of the existing species, have been found at Natchez, Mississippi. The European cave wolf was identical with the American wolf. Cattle were domesticated among the people of Switzerland during the earliest part of the Stone Period. Darwin's Animals Under Domestication, or Volume 1, page 103, that is to say, before the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. Even at that remote period, they had already, by long continued selection, been developed out of wild forms akin to the American buffalo. M. Jervis in his book Historic Nat des Mammiformes, volume 11, page 191, concludes that the wild race from which our domestic sheep was derived is now extinct. The remains of domestic sheep are found in the debris of the Swiss lake dwellings during the Stone Age. The domestic horse, ass, hog, and goat also date back to a like great antiquity. We have historical records 7,000 years old. And during that time, no similar domestication of wild animal has been made. That fact speaks volumes as to the vast periods of time during which man must have lived in a civilized state to effect the domestication of so many and such useful animals. And when we turn from the fauna to the flora, we find the same state of things. An examination of the fossil beds of Switzerland of the Miocene age reveals the remains of more than 800 different species of flower-bearing plants, besides mosses, ferns, etc. The total number of fossil plants catalogued from those beds, cryptogamous as well as phaenogamous, is upwards of 3,000. The majority of these species have migrated to America. There were others that passed into Asia, Africa, and even to Australia. The American types are, however, in the largest proportion. The analogues of the flora of the Miocene age of Europe are now in the forests of Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Florida. They include such familiar examples as magnolias, tulip trees, evergreen oaks, maples, plane trees, robinas, sequoias, etc. It would seem to be impossible that these trees could have migrated from Switzerland to America unless there was unbroken land communication between these two continents. It is still more remarkable a fact that a comparison of the flora of the Old World and New goes to show that not only was there communication by land over which the plants of one continent could extend to another, but that man must have existed and have helped this transmigration in the case of certain plants that were incapable of making the journey unaided. Otto Kuntz, a distinguished German botanist who has spent many years in the tropics, announces his conclusion that in America and in Asia, the principal domesticated tropical plants are represented by the same species. He instances that the Manahot utilisma, whose roots yield a fine flower, the taro, Colocasia esculenta, the Spanish or red pepper, the tomato, the bamboo, the guava, the mango fruit, and especially the banana. He denies that the American origin of tobacco, maize, and coconut is proved. He refers to the Paratum tilicaceum, a malvarous plant hardly noticed by Europeans, but very highly prized by the natives of the tropics. It is cultivated everywhere in the East and West Indies. Its supplies to the natives of the region so far apart their ropes and cordage. It is always seedless in a cultivated state. It exists in America before the arrival of Columbus. But Professor Kuntz pays a special attention to the banana or plantain. The banana is seedless. It is found throughout tropical Asia and Africa. Professor Kuntz asks, in what way was the plant, which cannot stand a voyage through the temperate zone, carried to America? And yet it was generally cultivated in America before 1492. Says Professor Kuntz, it must be remembered that the plantain is a tree-like herbaceous plant possessing no easily transportable bulbs like the potato or the dahlia, nor propagable by cuttings like the willow or the poplar. It has only a perennial root, which once planted needs hardly any care, and yet produces the most abundant crop of any known tropical plant. He then proceeds to discuss how it could have passed from Asia to America. He admits that the roots must have been transported from one country to the other by civilized man. He argues that it could not have crossed the Pacific from Asia to America because the Pacific is nearly 3 or 4 times as wide as the Atlantic. The only way he can account for the plantain reaching America is to suppose that it was carried there when the North Pole had a tropical climate. Is there any proof that civilized man existed at the North Pole when it possessed the climate of Africa? Is it not more reasonable to suppose that the plantain or banana was cultivated by the people of Atlantis and carried by their civilized agricultural colonies to the east and to the west? Do we not find a confirmation of this view in the fact alluded to by Professor Kuntz in these words? A cultivated plant which does not possess seeds must have been under culture for a very long period. We have not in Europe a single exclusively seedless, berry-bearing, cultivated plant, and hence it is perhaps fair to infer that these plants were cultivated as early as the beginning of the middle of the Diluvian period. It is possible that a plant of this kind could have been cultivated for this immense period of time in both Asia and America. What are the two nations, agriculture and highly civilized on those continents, by whom it was so cultivated? What has become of them? Where are the traces of their civilization? All the civilizations of Europe, Asia, and Africa radiated from the Mediterranean. The Hindu Aryans advanced from the northwest. They were kindred to the Persians, who were next-door neighbors to the Arabians, cousins of the Phoenicians, and who lived alongside the Egyptians, who had in turn derived their civilization from the Phoenicians. It would be a marvel of marvels if one nation on one continent had cultivated the banana for such a vast period of time until it became seedless. The nation retaining a peaceful, continuous agricultural civilization during all that time. But to suppose that two nations could have cultivated the same plant under the same circumstances on two different continents for the same unparalleled lapse of time is supposing an impossibility. We find such a civilization as was necessary, according to Plato, and under such a climate in Atlantis and nowhere else. We have found it reaching, by its continuous islands, 150 miles off the coast of Europe on one side and almost touching the West India Islands on the other side, while by its connecting ridges it bound together Brazil and Africa. But it may be said these animals and plants may have passed from Asia to America across the Pacific by the continent of Lemuria, or there may have been continuous land communications at one time at the Bering Strait. True, but an examination of the flora of the Pacific states shows that many of the trees and plants common to Europe and the Atlantic states are not to be seen on the west of the Rocky Mountains. The magnificent magnolias, the tulip trees, the plane trees, etc., which were found existing in the Miocene age in Switzerland and are found at present day in the United States, are altogether lacking on the Pacific coast. The sources of supply of that region seems to have been far inferior to the sources of supply of the Atlantic states. Professor Isa Gray tells us that out of 66 genera and 155 species found in the forests east of the Rocky Mountains, only 31 genera and 78 species are found west of the mountains. The Pacific coast possesses no pawpaw, no linden, no basswood, no locust trees, no cherry tree large enough for a timber tree, no gum trees, no sorrel tree, nor carmia, no persimmon trees, not a holly, only one ash that may be called a timber tree, no catalpa or sassafras, not a single elm or hackberry, not a mulberry, not a hickory or a beech or a true chestnut. These facts would seem to indicate that the forest flora of North America entered it from the east, and that the Pacific states possess only those fragments of it that were able to struggle over or around the great dividing mountain chain. We thus see that the flora and fauna of America and Europe testify not only to the existence of Atlantis, but to the fact that in an earlier age it must have extended from the shores of one continent to those of the other, and by this bridge of land, the plants and animals of one region passed to the other. The cultivation of the cotton plant and the manufacture of its product was known to both the Old and New World. Herodotus describes it, 450 BC, as the tree of India, that bears a fleece more beautiful than that of sheep. Columbus found the natives of the West Indies using cotton cloth. It was also found in Mexico and Peru. It is a significant fact that the cotton plant has been found growing wild in many parts of America, but never in the Old World. This would seem to indicate that the plant was a native of America, and this is confirmed by the superiority of American cotton and the fact that the plants taken from America to India constantly degenerate, while those taken from India to America constantly improve. There is a question whether the potato, maize, and tobacco were not cultivated in China ages before Columbus discovered America. A recent traveler said the interior of China, along with the course of the Yangtze Kiang, is a land full of wonders. In one place, piscicultural nurseries line the banks for nearly 50 miles. All sorts of inventions, the cotton gin included, claimed by Europeans and Americans, are to be found there 40 centuries old. Plants yielding drugs of great value without number. The familiar tobacco and potato, maize, white and yellow, corn and other plants believed to be indigenous to America have been cultivated there from time immemorial. Boniface, Histoire naturelle du maize, Paris, 1826, attributes a European or Asiatic origin to maize. The word maize, Indian corn, is derived from mahis or mahis, the name of the plant in the language of the island of Haiti. And yet, strange to say, in the Lettish and Livonian languages in the north of Europe, mais signifies bread. In Irish, mais is food, and in the Old High German, maz is meat. May not likewise the Spanish maize have antedated the time of Columbus and borne testimony to early intercommunication between the people of the Old and New Worlds? It is to Atlantis we must look for the origin of nearly all our valuable plants. Darwin says, Animals and Plants Under Domestication, Volume 1, page 374. It has often been remarked that we do not owe a single useful plant to Australia or the Cape of Good Hope, countries abounding to an unparalleled degree with endemic species, or to New Zealand or to America, north of Mexico. In other words, the domesticated plants are only found within the limits of what I shall show hereafter, was the empire of Atlantis and its colonies, for only here was to be found an ancient, long-continuing civilization capable of developing from a wild state those plants which were valuable to man, including all the cereals on which today civilized man depends for subsistence. M. Alphonse de Candolle, Candolle, tells us that we owe 33 useful plants to Mexico, Peru, and Chile. According to the same high authority, of 157 valuable cultivated plants, 85 can be traced back to their wild state. As to 40, there is doubt as to their origin, while 32 are utterly unknown in their aboriginal condition. Geographic Botanical Résumé of 1855, pages 810 to 991. Certain roses, the imperial lily, the tuberose, and the lilac, are said to have been cultivated in such vast antiquity that they are not known in their wild state. Darwin, Animals and Plants, Volume 1, page 370. And these facts are the more remarkable because, as de Candolle has shown, all the plants historically known to have been first cultivated in Europe still exist there in the wild state. Ibid. The inference is strong that the great cereals, wheat, oats, barley, rye, and maize, must have been first domesticated in a vast antiquity, or in some continent which has disappeared, carrying the original wild plants with it. Darwin quotes approvingly the opinion of Mr. Bentham in his book Historic Notes of the Cultivation of Plants, as the result of all the most reliable evidence that none of the cerealia, wheat, rye, barley, and oats, exist or have existed truly wild in their present state. In the Stone Age of Europe, 5 varieties of wheat and 3 of barley were cultivated. Darwin, Animals and Plants, Volume 1, page 382. He says that it may be inferred from the presence in the lake inhabitations of Switzerland there was a variety of wheat known as the Egyptian wheat, and from the nature of the weeds that grew amongst the crops, that the lake inhabitants either still kept up commercial intercourse with some other southern people, or had originally proceeded as colonists from the south. I should argue that they were colonists from the land where wheat and barley were first domesticated, to wit, Atlantis. And when the Bronze Age came, we find oats and rye making their appearance with the weapons of bronze, together with a particular kind of pea. Darwin concludes, Ibid, Volume 1, page 385, that wheat, barley, rye, and oats were either descended from 10 or 15 distinct species, most of which are now unknown or extinct, or from 4 or 8 species closely resembling our present forms, or so, wildly different as to escape identification. In which later case, he says, man must have cultivated the cereals at an enormously remote period, and at that time practiced some degree of selection. Rawlinson, in the book Ancient Monarchies, Volume 1, page 578, expresses the opinion that the ancient Assyrians possessed the pineapple. The representation on the monuments is so exact that I can scarcely doubt the pineapple being intended. See Layard's Nineveh and Babylon, page 338. The pineapple, Bromelia ananassa, is supposed to be of American origin and unknown to Europe before the time of Columbus, and yet, apart from the revelations of the Assyrian monuments, there has been some dispute on this point. American Encyclopedia, Volume 13, page 528. It is not even certain that the use of tobacco was not known to the colonists of Atlantis that settled in Ireland in an age long prior to Sir Walter Raleigh. Great numbers of pipes have been found in the raths and tumuli of Ireland, which there is every reason to believe were placed there by men of a prehistoric period. The illustration on page 63 represents some of the so-called Dane pipes, now in the collection of the Royal Irish Academy. The Danes entered Ireland many centuries before the time of Columbus, and if the pipes are theirs, they must have used tobacco or some substitute for it at that early period. It is probable, however, that the tumuli of Ireland antedate the Danes by thousands of years. Compare these pipes from the ancient mounds of Ireland with the accompanying picture of the Indian pipe of the Stone Age in New Jersey. Smithsonian Report, 1875, page 342. Recent Portuguese travellers have found the most remote tribes of savages in Africa holding no commercial intercourse with Europeans, using strangely shaped pipes in which they smoked a plant of the country. Investigations in America lead to the conclusion that tobacco was first burnt as an incense to the gods, the priest alone using the pipe, and from this beginning the extraordinary practice spread to the people and hence over the world. They may have crossed the Atlantic in a remote age and have subsequently disappeared with the failure of retrograding colonists to raise the tobacco plant.